Bonjour à tous et bienvenue à l'épisode 241 du podcast Innovation, Agilité et Excellence. Mon nom est Éric Lheureux et nous désirons vous offrir réflexion, conseils et perspectives afin de faire face aux perturbations du marché et d'accélérer la croissance profitable de vos organisations. Comme premier épisode de 2026, nous vous proposons la rediffusion d'un de nos plus importants épisodes. Nous avons eu le privilège de nous entretenir avec l'un des grands penseurs du management et de la stratégie de notre époque, le professeur Henry Mintzberg. Il nous parle de la stratégie, de son évolution dans un monde en constante mutation et de l'importance de la perspective stratégique. Il aborde également les défis auxquels sont confrontées les grandes entreprises, le rôle des managers et l'écoute des clients et l'importance des partenariats. Enfin, il partage avec nous ses réflexions sur l'évolution de l'enseignement de la stratégie et de la pratique de la gestion. Rappelez-vous, la stratégie peut être vue à la fois comme un processus et comme un contenu. Tout le monde au sein d'une organisation peut être un stratège potentiel. Et enfin, l'écoute des clients est essentielle à l'innovation. Et si vous aimez nos podcasts, je vous invite à vous abonner à notre lettre hebdomadaire où toutes les semaines, nous partageons conseils et perspectives afin de développer votre impact stratégique. Je vous souhaite une très bonne écoute et une excellente année 2026.
M. Henry Mintzberg enseigne depuis 1968 à la faculté de gestion des hôtels de l'Université McGill à Montréal. Il y occupe la chaire Cleghorn d'études en gestion. Il est ingénieur diplômé de l'Université McGill et détient une maîtrise et un doctorat de la Sloan School of Management du Massachusetts Institute of Technology, le fameux MIT. Il est l'auteur de 21 livres. Pensons à Simply Managing, Structure in Fives, Structures in Sevens, plus récemment, The Rise and Fall of Strategic Planning, Managers Not MBAs, Managing the Myth of Healthcare et Bedtime Stories for Managers. Et il est l'auteur de 180 articles scientifiques sur le management et la stratégie, dont 2 articles primés dans la Harvard Business Review. Il est également le récipiendaire de 21 diplômes honorifiques décernés par des universités du monde entier, dont Paris-9 Dauphine, l'Université de Lausanne et l'Institut Mines Télécom. M. Mintzberg a cofondé l'International Masters Program for Managers et l'International Masters for Health Leadership, tous les deux enseignés à l'Université McGill à Montréal, ainsi que l'entreprise coachingourselves.com, toutes des initiatives novatrices permettant aux managers en exercice d'apprendre ensemble à partir de leur propre expérience. M. Mintzberg est officier de l'Ordre du Canada. Il est également officier de l'Ordre national du Québec, ainsi que membre de la Société royale du Canada, le premier provenant d'une faculté de gestion. Il publie régulièrement un TWOG, Tweet to Blog, qui se veut un divertissement provocateur d'une ou 2 pages sur son site web, dont vous trouverez la référence dans les notes, et qui va bien au-delà des déclarations lapidaires d'une ligne ou 2 que vous trouverez sur @Mintzberg141. Bonne écoute. Professor Mintzberg, let's start with a difficult question. How do you define strategy? What is strategy?
Well, I have a complicated answer to a difficult question because I did a paper once called 5 Ps for strategy. Because if Kotler has 4 Ps for marketing, I've got 5 Ps for strategy.
Yes.
Plan, position, perspective, pattern, and ploy. Ploy is really a tactic, but we use the word strategy, when you kind of do something sneaky. It's not really strategic,
Yes.
but it's called strategy. But 2 of those definitions relate to the process and 2 to the content. So the content of strategy, Michael Porter would view strategy as position in the marketplace.
Yes.
Peter Drucker would view strategy as perspective, the worldview, the big picture.
Yes.
They're both right. And, you can have one without the other. You can have all kinds of positions without a perspective, or you can have a perspective and have different positions. So, and then as a process, which is where I really work, traditionally strategy has been viewed as a plan. I view strategy as a pattern. In the sense that it's not just where you want to go in the future. It's some consistency with where you've come from the past. So if a
Yes.
company keeps going up market, we can say it has a strategy of moving up market. Is that deliberate? In other words, was it planned? Maybe yes and maybe no. In fact, when I poll managers, when I introduce these definitions in our executive programs, and I ask managers, whether their strategy tends to be deliberate or emergent. In other words, was it planned or was it learned? Usually more people say emergent than deliberate, and most people say it's somewhere in between. So we need both definitions, I think.
So, based on what you've just said, how is it possible to ensure that strategy remains relevant in the rapidly evolving conditions of competitive arenas, industrial sectors, activity sectors, or external environments?
Well, we can use these definitions in a certain way because perspective can stay consistent and positions can change. So 3M you might say 3M has a strategy of it's really more an organization structure, but it's their strategy. Their structure is their strategy in a way of allowing people to experiment and try all kinds of new products. And so no matter how much change comes about, that perspective remains feasible while the positions change all the time. McDonald's can change what sandwiches or what food it supplies,
Yes.
while maintaining a fast food perspective. So the tricky part is when perspective changes. And the really I do a matrix of 2 by 2 of new position, new perspective, old perspective.
Yes.
So McDuckling à l'orange would be a new position, new perspective. Even in France, I don't think you're going to find that. And the opposite, old position, old perspective, would be serving a Big Mac on a whole wheat bread. It's not strategic. And new position for the existing perspective would be the 3M example I gave. The interesting one is new perspective and old position, which people might wonder about. But it's very interesting because it's what do you do when, in order to keep your existing customers in your existing with your existing products, you have to change your perspective. In other words, you were a bookstore and Amazon came along and suddenly started selling books in a different way. So to keep your old customers, you had to change your perspective of your business. It's quite common, actually, in organizations where they have to rethink their whole philosophy to keep this, like discount airlines. In order to keep your old customers, you've got to change how you do business. Old customers, old markets. If you're flying from Los Angeles to New York, to keep those customers, you have to change how you do business, your perspective.
Is it still important nowadays to think in terms of corporate business and functional strategy? Or is it more to focus on aligning collaborators around a mission and the efforts around a number of goals that derive from that mission?
I'm not sure about goals. I've always had a hard time with goals because goals are really targets. A lot of strategy is just setting a bunch of goals. What they call strategic planning is really strategic numbering, setting a lot of goals. Given what kind of, with the fact that conglomerates, for the most part, I mean, Tata in India would be a notable exception. GE finally gave in, but we don't have conglomerates much anymore. So corporate strategy takes on a different perspective, a different view of it.
Yes.
Corporate business.
Yes.
But I'm not sure how this comes in, but what's interesting to me, the greatest kind of strategic changes and structural changes in recent decades, because I take a sort of longer perspective, has been what I call organizations outward bound. And the interesting thing about corporate strategy is that the two main forms of corporate strategy historically have been diversification and vertical integration.
Yes.
Okay, you expanded by buying up your customers or imitating your customers or your suppliers and so on. That was vertical integration. Diversification, meaning you went into new businesses either by buying them or by opening new activities yourself. But the interesting thing is that outward bound nullifies those two strategies, because both diversification and vertical integration were absolutely adherent to the boundaries of the organization. If you bought a competitor or you bought another company, you took it inside your own boundaries. And if you vertically integrated, the same thing. The boundaries were firm. Now the boundaries aren't firm. You outsource, you do joint ventures, you do all kinds of stuff. You create platforms. You make your organization into some kind of platform, like Wikipedia and so on, and that kind of causes a questioning of the traditional strategies, because now the boundary between inside and outside is much more vague than it used to be. So instead of corporate business functional, we tend to have kind of internal outsourced forms of outsourcing and so on, forms of going outward bound.
We'll go back to some of these aspects. I want to hear you on organizations that evolve through time. For example, some are fairly old. For example, Bell Canada, and some are only a few years young. For example, OpenAI. How does strategic thinking evolve in these organizations or with them? Where's the chicken? Where's the egg? Is it how the the evolution of the corporation that drives its strategic evolution, or do you see strategic evolution driving that evolution of organizations of important organizations?
If there's an overall trend among among companies that become publicly traded, do an IPO and go on the market. If there's an overall trend, I think it's toward a diminution of strategic thinking. Okay. I find that the new ones, the AIs, the Amazon in its recent days, maybe not so much now, but Amazon in its recent times, and Google and so on, tended to be very creative, very imaginative strategically. They typically had a perspective. I mean, nobody had a strategic perspective the way Steve Jobs had a strategic perspective for Apple. That was quite clear. And then the positions, same perspective always. He was very firm on design and creative things and the way he involved the customer and so on.
Yes.
Excuse me. But the positions changed. So the positions changed from laptops to watches to all kinds of iPads to watches and so on and so forth. So there was a lot of them. Where is that in Apple today? Where is the creative strategic thinking in Apple today? They're adapting their product. And it was totally predictable because Steve Jobs was gone. He was the real thinker. And so if I see one trend, especially for publicly traded corporations, it's they become less and less strategic in their thinking. And they become more and more kind of modifications of their positions, the way Apple is today. So is there any new product in Apple that's really gained hold? I mean, they're converting their buds into hearing aids for older people, and they're doing things like that. But essentially, you don't think of Apple as strategic thinking today, I think, the way it was. And as far as Amazon is concerned, I think they're continuing to refine a business model of delivery that is brilliant, and losing it with their business model of display. I don't know, not display, but you go on Amazon's site and you see 5 different prices for the same product. They're kind of losing it. They're kind of getting very nutty with their marketplace.
Yes, the platform has taken over the other aspects in their view of what they do.
Yes, and they're not, responding to the customer. They're making it either manipulative for the customer or confusing, and probably both.
Which leads me to this other question. I've taken these company names because they're close to me, or they're what I use in business case studies, or used to work for some of those. IBM, Nortel, Research in Motion, and now Intel. All are having very, very difficult times now, or have seen their peaks long ago.
Yeah.
And some are fortunate to still exist. And Intel's the latest one to go through difficulties with minus 40% on the top line in the last 2 years. Is it a case of A, if it isn't broke, don't fix it until it's too late? B, forced studies and poor governance? C, a result of the vicissitudes of Anglo-Saxon capitalism with its emphasis on short-term results? D, all of the above. E, none of the above. What's your take on these 4 cases? Or is it just specific to this high-tech arena?
No, it's D, I think. I think it's all of the above. But I think you leave one thing out.
Yes.
How dumb of it were the British people to allow Winston Churchill to die? I mean, Churchill was brilliant. He was so smart. How could they just let him die like that? Well, we can't let GM or GE or Intel or whatever die. But the fact of the matter is they get old, they get sick, they get, and few of them die from heart attacks. Most of them die from cancers, slow, repeating cancers that just go on and on and on. The governments bail them out and everything. We should celebrate the death of great companies.
Yes.
Instead of assuming there are a few that sustain. I think GM's probably not doing that badly now, but it was smart enough to get a woman chief executive. But they get old. They get what's the word? I forget the word, but they get sclerosis in their veins or whatever, in their bones. And this
it gets difficult for if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, Hemingway said, I went bankrupt very slowly, and then all of a sudden, it's probably a version of this for these major companies.
Good comment. Yeah.
I'll quote you directly. Real strategists get their hands dirty for digging for ideas, and real strategies are built from the nuggets they uncover. That's from back in 1994. Now, thanks to you, most managers and executives now recognize that strategic thinking happens both in formal and informal ways. Do you see it happening at every level in organizations? And should it be every collaborator's role to spend time in both formal and informal strategic thinking of some sort?
Should. Yes, and should. Because the interesting strategies can come from anywhere. I mean, a strategy is just an insight that you build into something. So my favorite example of a simple insight, very simple insight, was somebody in IKEA had to get a table in his car and he didn't fit, so he took the legs off.
Yes.
And then came the strategic moment. Wait a second, if we have to take the legs off, so do our customers. And that changed the furniture business. So that's a nugget.
Yes.
It wasn't a nugget until they realized it. I mean, taking the legs off wasn't a nugget. Realizing that was a strategic, could have been a strategic action was the nugget. And it can come from anywhere. So yes, smart companies not only encourage people to come up with ideas, but listen to their people and have open communication patterns so those ideas get through.
Yes.
And often they don't. So it's the should. That's the way it should be. Now, something else should be. You used the word strategic thinking, and I think I did earlier too. But I think strategic seeing and strategic doing are much more important. So was it strategic thinking to say our customers do, or maybe it was strategic seeing? You know, wait a minute,
Yes.
I'm a customer in the sense that I'm taking a table home. I have to take the legs off, and then you kind of see the connection. You make a little switch, you see the connection. And strategic doing is if you never put a table in your car, if nobody in IKEA ever put a table in their own car, they never would have come up with this. So it was strategic doing that led to strategic thinking, and not the other way around.
When you say that, it's funny. When I live in France now, and when Ben Smith took over the top job at Air France, I said I would not want his job. But the first thing, if I was to have it, I'd do was have all my senior executives take one flight every day and make a report on their customer experience and how we could act on this. So essentially, that would be strategic seeing. And now let's work on the ability to strategically do what we've just seen and improve on what we've seen.
And let me add something to that. Not only in first class and business class.
Yes, of course.
They should sit in economy class as often as they sit. As often as their customers sit in economy class.
Yes.
I wrote a book called Bedtime Stories for Managers, which
Yes.
my office is in a bit of turmoil now, but
Yes.
it's called Bedtime Stories for Managers. And the opening story is about managing scrambled eggs. Because years ago I took a flight on Eastern Airlines, which was the biggest airline in the world at the time, and they served these things they called scrambled eggs. And I said to the flight attendant, I've eaten bad stuff, but never anything this bad. And she said, I know we keep telling them, they won't listen. Now, if you're running a cemetery and you don't speak to your customers, I can understand. But if you're running an airline, turns out I told this story to a group, and turns out somebody from IBM came up to me and he said, the president of Eastern Airlines, chief executive, was late for a plane. So they bumped the first class passenger so he could sit in first class. Wow. And amazing. I wish I'd been on the board at that point.
Oh, yes.
And I guess he was feeling guilty, so he went to apologize. He had to ask where economy class was because he didn't know. I made that up.
Yes.
Not the rest.
Yes.
And he apologized. Turned out to be he apologized to the president of IBM. Now, the moral of the story is not that you shouldn't bump the president of IBM on your airline. The moral of the story is that those scrambled eggs would have been off that plane if anybody in the executive team had eaten those scrambled eggs once. But they were busy sitting themselves in business or first class.
I remember the CEO of American Airlines saying, if the American flying public wants to be treated like cattle, let's treat them like cattle. Famous last words.
They don't want to be treated like cattle at all.
Nobody wants, of course not. That's why Southwest has done so well. Is it desirable that strategic, let's say thinking, seeing, doing, be made with other stakeholders such as governments, citizens, or other business partners? Do you see that in your research that companies who do include sometimes faraway stakeholders in their strategic reviews or strategic thinking get better results than others? How do you see the importance of these other stakeholders?
Yeah, I can't talk about that relationship, but certainly one aspect of Outward Bound are all kinds of joint ventures with public sector organizations, what I call plural sector or community organizations. There's it's not necessary, but a lot of companies do very well with those kinds of partnerships. And that's all part of going outward bound.
Another question. I'd like to say that management tools need to evolve and adapt in the VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. While some of my interviewees say that the world has always been VUCA, and others say that the only letter worth paying attention there is the C for complexity. How do you describe our rapidly changing world?
Oh, wow. First of all, complexity is only complex when we don't understand it. Soldiers who got infections, nobody knew what the heck to do with it until somebody came along and invented or discovered penicillin, and suddenly it wasn't complicated at all. So complexity is either true complexity or else it's ignorance. I was reading recently about cholera and how they dealt
Yes.
with cholera, and they tried everything. They tried the weirdest thing. It was much too complicated until a Dr. Snow in England came along with the idea that cholera was transmitted through water and not air, and suddenly, bang, all the mystery was gone. It was being transmitted through water, and they through fecal material, fecal, whatever it's called,
Yes,
in
yes, yes,
water,
yes.
and that was the end of the complexity. So my focus today is what I call rebalancing society. I've written a book by that title. I've
Yes.
got a website called rebalansingsociety.org. And I think the multiple problems that we're facing, like climate change, like the distribution of wealth,
Yes.
like superpowers and everything else, can be explained by the imbalance in ourselves and especially in our societies. And balance means balance on three legs, not two. It's public, private, and plural, or community. And to me, if you add community, and a lot of complexity disappears, and suddenly you start to realize.
A question more on what you've been doing for a long time, teaching. It took me a long time to fully understand or to fully understand what strategy is, and I'm still evolving in that perspective and with those concepts since my time at HEC Montréal with Professor Hafsi and Blank. How has teaching strategy evolved since you first started teaching a number of years ago?
Well, I'm not sure I'm the one to answer that question because I stopped teaching MBAs in about 1985.
Yes.
I still teach in executive programs. So how has it evolved? Well, I mean, I teach about emergent strategy. Usually a colleague teaches about deliberate strategy, and then I teach about emergent strategy, and then we combine into a workshop asking them how they can use this stuff. So that's how I teach it.
Yes.
How the field teaches it, I don't know. I get this sense from emails and so on that more and more people have bought into the idea of emergent strategy. So I think that's changed a lot. But I don't know, when Porter came along, everything kind of converged around Porter.
Yes.
And Porter certainly had important things to say, and I wouldn't teach strategy without having them become knowledgeable about Porter
Yes.
and competitive strategy.
Yes.
But now it's that convergence has gone, and now we're all over the place. I don't know kind of what the field is anymore. So that's kind of
we had that question whether we should involve or should every collaborator in the companies be involved in strategic thinking, doing, seeing. Can we accelerate the understanding of strategy at every level? Is it feasible? Is it possible? How can we do this? In order to get this improved alignment on what we're doing and where we're going.
Well, I think everybody is a strategist kind of thing. Everybody is a potential strategist, and so on. And I think we have to tie in more to the reality. When I tell the IKEA story, nobody can argue about the origin. It didn't come from an executive meeting. It didn't come from some board saying, why don't we look at this huge opportunity? Why don't we go into unassembled furniture?
Yes.
That's not the way it happened. So I think we need to kind of open up the whole process and get people, get all members of the organization more involved. Yeah.
Finally, one of your seminal work is on what was managers really doing. How has what managers do evolved since you started studying what they really do? Has it, or If not, why hasn't it?
Well, I would argue in a way that it shouldn't. In the sense that management is a practice.
Yes.
It's not a science where you learn the latest technique and that's it. It's not a profession. There's no credentials that enable you to be an effective manager. It's a practice. It's a practice where art, craft, and a lot of craft experience, some art, creativity, and a little bit of science, evidence, but we don't have that much meat. So I draw the triangle: art, craft, science, and management's inside there. So I don't think it should evolve in the sense that, become more scientific or that kind of thing. Entrepreneurs tend to be more on the art scale, and people running established businesses, I think effectively, tend to be more on the craft scale, and people who run them ineffectively tend to be more on the science scale. In other words, all numbers, numbers, numbers.
Yes.
So I'm not sure it should evolve. But I wish I had the books here. But my short answer to your question is in 1973, I published The Nature of Managerial Work, and then and a few years ago, I published Simply Managing, and that's how it's evolved for me. But it didn't evolve in the sense of kind of rethinking totally what managers do. I think the characteristics of interruption and action-oriented, all those things I wrote about in my thesis, are still there. I have a better framework, I think, for the roles that managers play, although people seem to prefer the old one to the new one. But I think the new one is better. So I think the real evolution has been negative in the sense that a lot of MBAs have carried management practice much more to the scientific side. Remote control managing. You sit in your office and you deem numbers that people should meet, and you don't get on the ground and see what's going on.
My last question, Professor Mintzberg, if I was to write a book entitled Understanding Henry Mintzberg, where should I start?
Finally, on this, you left out finally. My last book being Understanding Organizations. Finally. You sent me the questions ahead of time, but I didn't kind of think about that one. You'd probably have to come out with me in the canoe, take a walk with me, sit by my side while I write in the mornings. But I think I'm thinking about kind of what I've done. I think what I've done mostly is reframing.
Yes.
I reframe managerial work, or I offered a reframe of managerial work. Same thing with strategy, emergent beyond deliberate. I reframe management education with our impm.org course in which managers sit at round tables and learn from each other half the time. Rebalancing society is an attempt to reframe our political structure. And I'm a synthesizer, I think. I synthesize. I bring things together. My book on structure was subtitled The Synthesis of the Research. And that's what I tend to do. So if you want to understand me, that's kind of a bit of understanding.
Fantastic. Professor Mintzberg, it's been a pleasure having you on our podcast, and thank you very much for your time.
Okay, Jean-François, it's my pleasure to do it.
Je confirme qu'avec les grands, chaque mot est important. Je ne veux pas tenter de résumer tout ce qui a été dit dans cet entretien, car beaucoup se perd dans la traduction, mais surtout vous inciter à réécouter ce que M. Mintzberg dit sur les sujets qui vous préoccupent, mais surtout sur sa définition de la stratégie, ses 5 P, sur les notions de pensée stratégique, de regard stratégique et d'action stratégique, ce qu'il a appelé strategic thinking, strategic seeing et strategic doing, qui découle de sa vision de la stratégie comme un motif, pattern en anglais, le mot qu'il a utilisé. Je reprends aussi une citation. Strategic doing leads to strategic thinking and not the other way around. Et finalement, j'ai trouvé une bonne réponse à mon incompréhension de la faillite de Nortel. On en reparlera dans un autre podcast. J'espère que cet épisode vous a plu autant qu'à nous. Je vous invite à consulter les liens dans la description pour accéder aux notes de l'épisode et pour vous abonner à notre lettre hebdomadaire. Nous y partageons nos perspectives pour vous aider à développer vos compétences stratégiques et ainsi contribuer à développer durablement et profitablement votre organisation. Sur ce, bonne semaine et à très bientôt.